Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel, and this week I'm going to give a complete in-depth deep dive of Crisis on the Right, Plancenoit 1815 from White Dog Games. This game is now about 10 years old. I've been looking for a copy for quite a while. I managed to pick up a folio version. I'll show you shortly a sort of unbagging of some of the key components in the game, and then I've recorded a playthrough playing solitaire, which will take you through one or a few turns at a time with a little bit of dialogue around the action and what's happening during the game. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the game itself, some of the key elements. So it's obviously a game recreating that crisis for Napoleon towards the end of the Battle of Waterloo, where the Prussians were arriving on the field and threatening his rear and right flank around Plancenoit and the areas around there, and more of his resources were pulled across to protect that area, taking away crucial troops that probably could have helped him win the battle against the Allied lines under Wellington. So how does the game do in terms of period flavour, mechanics, generally how does it fit into that kind of Waterloo era type game? I really liked it. It's a small footprint game. It's not complicated, but there are a few quite useful little mechanics in there, such as the action points. So you never know from one round to another, how many actions or segments you're going to get in a turn, and within that, how many action points you're going to get to activate units or do things with troops. Everything costs an action or a number of actions, and what you're doing each turn is you're rolling a dice for the French and a dice for the Prussians to determine their action points for the turn. If you roll a 1, the turn will end at the end of those two segments. If you don't, you go on to a second phase in the turn and potentially a third phase in the turn, at which point it will finish. So potentially there are 3 segments each, if you want to call it that, within a turn, unless either of you roll a 1 and then the turn will end. So that adds some unpredictability in terms of turn length, as well as how many action points you may or may not get. And that played a big part in the game that I played. There were turns where, for example, the French were rolling 6s, they had lots and lots of actions. Other turns where they rolled a 1 and then it brings the turn to an end, but of course they've only got 1 action in a turn, in a segment. They can't do very much. Same for the Prussians. So it does add that, what's the word I'll be looking for? It does add that unknown element to the game, which in war there's always unknown elements when things are going to happen. Our message is going to get through at certain times. Our troops are going to react at certain times. So I quite liked that. It means that every game is going to be slightly different. And although it's a little bit random, it kind of scratches an itch for me. You've got a multiple turn game, 12 turns, which potentially could be a very long game or potentially a very short game. So for the Prussians, it's about utilising that time to push on and really force the French back. For the French, it's about praying for time to tick by so they can defend the areas they need to hold. And again, one of the elements I really liked was the reinforcement schedule. So both forces start with relatively small numbers of counters for setup, so you can get into the game quite quickly, but reinforcements become available for both sides at different points throughout the game, but they don't have to be used, and it's a decision of the respective commanders on whether they want to spend their action points to bring on these reinforcements and indeed then start moving them. Now, for the French, that perhaps becomes slightly easier because they're falling back towards their lines where the reinforcements are coming from. So if they do have to bring in the young guard or the old guard even, although it's a costing victory points for the French as well, they haven't got to move as far to get into the action. Whereas for the Prussians, who've got a lot more reinforcements and it doesn't cost them victory points, they've got the action points of then trying to move these troops to catch up with their line that's advancing on the French. So it becomes harder for the Prussians if they don't get their reinforcements in quite early in the game. And again, I found that in my game, I left one brigade at the back quite a while, and by the time I thought about bringing it on, it was going to take too long for it to catch up with the main army. So a couple of key mechanisms in there that I really like, and I think that command and control is a real key stickler in the game. Terrain is really important, utilising that, particularly with things like artillery, high ground. There are caveats if you're advancing up hills or down hills, attacking up hills, attacking down hills, firing off hills. Likewise, artillery is not as effective if it's in things like forests or towns. Cavalry are the same. They kind of their strength is reduced if they're attacking infantry, so they're better against other cavalry. And then there's the element of trying to add in extra supports into your selected combats, and that's again not always easy with zones of control, which again play a big part in the game. So there's some really interesting different elements, and it's not complicated. You can just start the game pretty quickly, start pushing a few counters around, but what you've got is lots of options of ways that you can play it or do it. I mean, the game, as I'll show you in the unbagging, is literally run on four pieces of paper, and really there isn't much more in it. I think the action points is probably the key element. I mean, you do have other things in there. For example, cavalry can do reaction movement, but it costs action points to retreat cavalry in the face of the enemy outside of your turn. So again, as an active player, you don't have to spend all your points. You can keep those and keep them in the kit bag, in effect, to either use in your opponent's turn if you need to make reactions, or indeed to save them up to help you in the following segment to maybe win or turn to win initiative, or indeed to have more points to utilise for a selected thing that you want to do. For example, to initiate a combat in a particular area of the field. But the actions are very clever. So we've talked a bit about reinforcements, bombardments. We've also talked about ezocs, and we've talked about combat. But of course, you can also use action points to rally units. So if you want to rally a disrupted unit, if you want to rally an eliminated unit, i.e. bring it back into the game, you can do that. It's very, very expensive, and the unit won't be at full strength when it comes back on. I didn't do it once in my game. It was just too much cost-wise. Disrupted units, sometimes you will rally those, or even a step loss. It is expensive, and there's only a finite number of action points that you have, so you have to think very carefully about how you're going to utilise those. But anyway, that gives you a brief overview of some of the key elements that I like about the game. I'm just going to show you now the unbagging element, and then we'll move on to the playthrough, and I'll finish up from there with a very quick summary of how I found the game. Enjoy. So, just to show you first of all what you get in the folio package. Obviously the box game would be the same other than a nice box, but this was the only one I could find. So you get a nice wrapper with some pretty cool artwork. I quite like that. I think it really sort of sets the scene. On the back, it just gives you a little bit of an overview. I would call this a bit of a beer and pretzels game. It's not too heavy going. So you've got your rule book, player aid sheet, quite a small map, and your markers and counters. Features of the game. So I'd agree with all of those points. We'll come on to some of those when we talk about the game itself, and then just a little bit of an overview of the map. You've got the map itself, which is quite small, so it doesn't take up a large footprint. Quite a nice map, easy to see the detail, the main town area, the woods, the high ground. So this area here is where the Prussians are coming from. This is La Belle Alliance going up here, and this is the flank of the French army with the reserves down here. When you look close up, maybe some of the artwork is maybe not quite as defined as it has been in other maps that White Dog have done. Again, this is quite an old game, so maybe an element of just age with the map sheet, but it's perfectly good enough. And as you'll see when I show you my playthrough of my game that I did, no problem at all. So that's the map. You got a simplified rule book, literally runs to four pages. Yes, looks pretty dry, but it's not difficult read. It's quite easy to follow. You tend to be looking more at the play sheet here, so you've got the key elements that you'll need in the game. That's got most of the information you need. On the back of the rules, actually, you've got an action summary table here. So sometimes for a lot of the game, you can have this sheet turned over. You're only really going to need this side when you're doing combat factors. So not a big deal, but you could take a copy of it and have two on the table. And then you've got a quick start guide, which again, really useful. Just gives you some of those key points that you need to understand with the way the game works. Alongside that, you've got counters, which are all bagged up. I'm just going to show you some of these. So the counters, couple of points really. First of all, they're the nice chunky thick counters that we've come used to, so really like that. You know, good thickness, good stock. For me, with my aging eyes, when you're looking down on the table, as you can probably see like that, it's quite hard to make out the detail at the top here. So when you're trying to initially work out who goes with what, you've got to get these quite close up to work out what belongs to what division or brigade. But they're still nicely done. That's some Prussian units, just to give you an idea. One thing that may be a little bit disgruntling is you can see on some of the counters there's an overlap of print from other counters on there. That's more relevant with one of the French ones I've got here. You can see that coming in underneath, which is a shame. And again, then you lose a little bit at the top. So that was an issue I know that happened in a few runs in the early days of the game. Some of the other games have had the similar issues. So it would be nice to have a set that doesn't have that, but overall it doesn't impact massively on playability of the game, where you're looking predominantly at these two numbers and maybe just need to know the name of the brigade or division. So that's just a brief overview of the package itself. What I'll do now is show you my playthrough. I've played Solitaire. Again, I'd just like to point out that I've played turns through, then recorded a little bit of dialogue about what happened in the turn or after a couple of turns, just to speed up that playthrough for you. But hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavour of my thoughts on the game as I go through it. I must say some of the filming was done at night, some of it daytime, depending on when I could fit a few turns in. So you may see picture quality vary depending on lighting at the time. I do apologise for that, but it's real life. It's me playing a game as and when I can fit a few turns in around my busy lifestyle and work life, family, etc. And yeah, I think overall you'll get a good feel for the game watching the playthrough. So without further ado, enjoy and I'll give a quick summary at the end of the game. So this is the position at the end of turn one. We had 3 segments in this turn, and first of all we can see up here we had some combats with 2 landwehr units under Bulow's command and dragoons for the French under Drummond, destroyed or eliminated, and the French threw their dragoons in across this area here over the top of the hill to make some spoiler attacks as the Prussians came across the open terrain, but they didn't fare that well. So this unit here has already been reduced. This unit here has already been reduced. As you can see, it's only a 1 strength unit now. And obviously they've lost a unit, and they've got artillery that's been disrupted at the top here. Prussians didn't have it all their own way. Say they lost a couple of units, and certainly the attack at the top of the map here under Bülow took the worst of it. Lostin's command, that's all that's left. The other 2 units were part of that, and then we're down into Hiller's command down here. So finally poised, entering into turn 2. The French did deviate these units here. Gemin, they came down the road from further up at the crossroads. They're originally sitting behind the infantry here. They've come down initially to, again, just sort of form a little bit of an initial defence line on the heights to protect Plancenoit and stop the Prussians from outflanking the French position through the Bois de Vire. So interesting start to the game. We're now going to go into turn 2, and we'll see how long that lasts, and I'll give you another update afterwards. Okay, so this is actually the end of turn 3, start of turn 4. Turn 2 was cut abruptly short by the dice rolls by the French and Prussian commanders, with a 1 rolled, which means that you only get 1 segment in that turn rather than normal 3. So it was a very short-paced turn with very few action points. Both sides really consolidated their position, and we moved straight into turn 3. That was very different. We had the Prussians with slightly more action points, and they went aggressive, charging across the heights with various brigades, but predominantly using Wilhelm's newly arrived cavalry to push across and make some attacks en masse on Simner's infantry, part of Lebeau's division, and some success and some failures. As you can see now, the Prussians have lost some more units. They have some disrupted units, but they did manage to force some of the French to retreat, but they still just haven't been able to get up onto those heights as yet before they ran out of points. The French, for their part, had to use a lot of their points to aid their defence because they were outnumbered and outgunned. And they really haven't been able to do a great deal more at this stage other than kind of hold the line, which they seem to be doing reasonably well as we're going into turn 4. But of course, this is a 12-turn game. The Prussians now have a lot of reinforcements waiting to come on. They haven't had the points as yet to bring them into action, but we can see here if they can bring them into action, then that really is going to put a lot of strain on the French lines, and it may be the French, one, will start to have to retreat closer to Plancenoit, or indeed they may well have to bring in the Young Guard as a last resort to plug any gaps. However, at the moment, they're holding and managing to keep the Prussian storm at bay. But we'll move into turn 4 and see what happens next. Okay, so we're now at the beginning of turn 5. Turn 4 ran for 2 segments. We had a number 1 rolled in the beginning of the second segment. So again, a shortish turn, although quite a lot happened. In the first segment, the Prussians got quite considerably more action points and decided to thrust forward here, putting in multiple units, and cause this quite strong French group. They've got a 6-point combat factor infantry and looks like 12-pounders there. They got disrupted. And the Prussians just had 1 unit retreat but took no damage. They've also managed to get hacks brigades into play. They're now over here and sort of coming down this way with the view to trying to sort of come into the woods and the road around the Bois de Virere and head in towards Plancenoit, flanking the French hanging on now at the top. As you can see in the second segment, the Prussians again had much more in the way of action points and launched again another assault into the centre. The French have really had to use their points just to stabilise the line, bringing these troops forward. But as it stands, the Prussians are making slow progress. They're still not quite on the heights, but perhaps the next turn could be the turn that they're pushed in, particularly if the Prussians win initiative, which they have. Because we've already done the rolls for turn 5. So Prussians will be going first. I would suspect they're going to be pushing hard to get the French back on the heights here and take the heights. Once they can get a foothold on the heights, I think things will open up for them and it will put the French under a lot of pressure. But the French are just hanging on. We shall see what happens in turn 6. We've still got some reinforcements up there in the top right hand corner. I should have put Tippelskirch's units, and now Kraft's units also will become available, and they are available coming on down here. So suddenly they can really start piling the pressure on, and I think the French may need to bring in the Young Guard to bolster their ranks. It means giving up some victory points, but at the moment they're okay. But of course they can't afford for any kind of retreat to turn into a rout. So very conscious up here that this area is the area they need to protect. La Belle Alliance, which is heading up towards where Napoleon's main line is. So yeah, things to think about for both sides. Apologies for the slight glare reflection on the plexiglass I'm using, but it's the easiest way to see the counters clearly, or as clear as can be. So I hope that helps. We'll push on with turn 5 and see where we end up once we're halfway into the game. Well, everybody, we're about to go into what it will be now turn 6 after a 3-segment turn. Lots happening. The Prussians have now pushed the French back, started to flank round with their Wilhelm cavalry units, although the French artillery's managed to disrupt these right at the end of the turn, which has blunted their advance. The French are still sort of hanging on here. They're being attacked or pinned by some Landwehr units with the cavalry there. The infantry have been trying to kind of reform to form a defensive line. Probably going to have to break some more of these units down into smaller units to cover the area. But you can see this mass of Prussians coming across. And likewise down the bottom, you've got still Prussian reinforcements waiting here. But these troops here, under Tipelsk, have been advancing solidly up into the woods, the Bois de Hubemont, with the view to coming across here and coming up underneath into Plancenoit. And Hack has now sort of formed a strong position ready to take on Jenin. The French have been forced to bring in Du Semi, apologies for the accents, Young Guard under Boroy, and they've swept up the road here, literally into Plancenoit and coming in to form a further defensive position so that Jenin can fall back on them, and hopefully that will enable them to hold on to the position a bit longer. Okay, so we're now at the beginning of turn 9, and it's been an eventful couple of turns and segments. The French have particularly struggled with very low dice rolls, resulting in shortened turns, which didn't help the Prussians, but certainly from the French's point of view, meant they had very few action points to repel what was an onslaught from Prussia all across the lines, as you can see here. They brought up all their reinforcements as much as they could. They've still got some to come on, and they've really been pushing and attacking across the lines, putting pressure across the whole line and stretching the French quite thin. You can see we've got several disrupted units here. The French actually lost a unit, so both flanks are under huge pressure, although the French have been fighting back where they can, and they're starting to come back towards Plancenoit, as you can see here on the map. As yet, no sign of the old guard. The young guard under Boroy got a bloodied nose themselves and had to take a reduction from an attack from Hack's brigades. So we move into turn 9. There's 4 turns in effect left now, potentially up to 12 segments, although I suspect it will be less. The one thing Prussia doesn't have is time, and it needs to start pushing into these areas as quickly as it can, ideally over here. For now the French are holding, but the position is certainly precarious and pressure is being applied all across the line, so we'll see what happens. So we are now at the end of turn 10, coming into the last 2 turns of the game, and lots has been happening, and really probably the French have consolidated overall their position. As you can see down in the south here, the Russian attack through the different woods, the Bois de Vire and the Bois de Hubemont, has stalled. We had a number of disrupted units down here. They've managed to rally some, but the French have been able to plug the gap. The Young Guard anchoring that position. It's making it very difficult for these Prussian units to advance. Up here at the heights, the Prussians have definitely pushed the French back. The French have been doing quite an orderly retreat. Particularly the cavalry have been doing lots of spoiler attacks, then falling back in front of infantry. As you can see, there's been a lot of disruption to the Prussian advance, and again they're just trying to get numbers up to make those count. Up here there's been cavalry action. The Prussians have now brought forward the rest of Wilhelm's brigade to sort of funnel through these gaps and starting to flank. This has caused the French to take the decision to bring in Morand and France's old guard units, the last reserves from the Emperor. They've just come in south of La Belle Alliance to plug this gap and ensure that the infantry, specifically for victory conditions, cannot get through to these areas at the back here. Cavalry cannot win the game in that regard, but 12 strength of infantry getting in any of these hexes here would result in victory for the Prussians. So with 2 turns to go, that's looking difficult to achieve. I think for the Prussians, it's all out attack down into Plancenoit. The problem for the Prussians for the last 2 turns in all segments has been very low dice rolls, unfortunately, and the French have had some better rolls and been able to get rid of disruptions and generally form better defensive positions. For the Prussians, who are trying to both advance, attack, bring up reserves, the disruption is starting to count. They can't rally troops because they haven't got enough action points to do that. As you can see over here, the troops of Kraft's brigades have just not been able to advance, to add extra weight to the attacks. And with 2 turns, 6 maximum segments, possibly a lot less, it's looking a difficult game for the Prussians to win, but it's not over. The French lines definitely have got gaps, and definitely some of the units are weakened. So we'll see what happens in turn 11, and I'll give you another update just before we go into the final turn of the game. Well, here we are going into the final turn, turn 12. Turn 11 was frankly a bit of a disaster for the Prussians, with only 2 segments played because one was rolled, which ended the turn. And up here, the Old Guard launched an assault into Wilhelm's cavalry brigade, pushing back and destroying a unit as well. France's guard units were disrupted in the attack, but they have pushed the Prussians back away from this area that they were trying to infiltrate. And as you can see now, it looks like the French have cemented a fairly secure line, which follows all the way down here. Some of the young guard have now moved up onto the heights to support the centre, which again the Prussians are struggling to move against. Down here, a localised success for one of Hack's brigades, managed to push out and destroy some of Simner's division, and have moved into the woods, pushing towards the outskirts of Plancenoit, but I fear too late, and there's still some very strong units of the Young Guard holding that. Down here, not much else has happened. Again, as well as 2 segments, the second segment, Prussia only had 1 action point, so very limited capability for them in the penultimate turn. So 1 turn left. It's looking like the French are going to succeed in defending the right flank, but let's play it out and see what happens. So the end of turn 12, the end of the game, and it is suspected a French victory by a considerable margin actually in this case, although it was a tightly fought contest. Down here we had some small gains by the Prussians in the final turn. Purchase men managed to push units back here, and they literally are now across the brook and about to advance into Plancenoit. The French are a little bit weaker down here, so they've taken a fair bit of damage, lost a couple of units. With the Prussians coming up here, a couple more turns would have probably seen them sweeping in, but the French managed to hold. In the centre, really a bit of a stalemate. The French just had the numbers to hang on there and stunt these assaults coming in initially through heavy artillery fire in the turns before, and then just sheer numbers of stands that they had there, men. And up top again, the Old Guard just really filled that gap, and despite French men being basically disrupted on several turns through attacks, they managed to keep rallying and stop the cavalry sort of advancing any further. So the whole of these areas, the Emperor's rear and the flank, completely safeguarded. Overall a French victory. The game, very, very interesting. Really enjoy playing it from the perspective of both sides. Learned a lot. A few things I did wrong throughout or picked up during the game that I wasn't doing right. Tactically, lots of ways to play this game. I'll do a little bit more of my final thoughts and a review of the game at the end of the video. But I hope you've enjoyed this playthrough, and will, as I say, give you some pros and cons and my thoughts on the game separately to this. So the end of my solitaire experience with Crisis on the Right. What did I think? Really enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it. I dipped in and out. I played this over about 4 or 5 evenings, stroke bit of afternoon here and there. Just did a turn here and there when I had a bit of spare time. It was a really nice game because it's small footprint. You could leave it set up, come back to it, start looking at it from different perspectives with different commanders. I quite enjoy playing it solitaire, but of course as a 2-player interactive game, I think it would really come into its own. I tried to be impartial as the Prussian stroke French player. I think the one thing I learned very quickly as a Prussian player is I probably needed to be more aggressive more quickly. Those turns soon ratchet up and go, particularly if you have shortened turns due to the system I spoke about with the segments and dice rolls. And there were quite a few turns that are ended in the second segment or even in the first segment, which was a real killer for the Prussians in terms of getting their troops forward. For the French, there were a few squeaky periods where you're looking at it from the French perspective thinking they're just going to collapse. They're not going to be able to hold this line. The Prussians were starting to outflank in the south. They were starting to outflank in the north with the cavalry, Wilhelm's brigade sweeping round. But timing of those guard reserves for the French is absolutely critical in both parts of those fields. The young guard coming in and securing Plancenoit and protecting some of the French units hanging out there in the woods trying to kind of hold the Prussians at bay. And again, the old guard, Moran's old guard, coming into play towards the end of the game in the north, which just cemented the line, meant the enemy cavalry couldn't sweep round, and in fact got pushed back as the guards just relentlessly pushed on. So that I really enjoyed that aspect of it. There are a few things I probably didn't utilise in the game, for example splitting units, which is something you're allowed to do, which is quite nice. There are counters provided to allow you to utilise smaller units from one unit, and you can rebuild them back again if you want. They're not quite as effective as small units. They're less strong, less combat effective. Sometimes they move a bit quicker, but that's an element I'd like to explore with future games a bit more, because I think certainly in terms of hanging on or holding on to positions, spreading the line thinner, particularly for the French, that could be really crucial. I think for the Prussians, they probably wouldn't use it as much because they want to max out their combat points. So why would they break the units up unless they really needed to? So I really enjoyed that element of the game. I certainly felt at the end of the game that the Prussians had the ability to push the French further than they actually did. They were only just starting to hit the outskirts of Plancenoit in the south and hadn't made any impression in the north. The French artillery is very, very powerful if it's used properly for bombardments. Quite a few instances in the centre on the heights where some of the bigger batteries, which were probably the 12-pounder batteries, were able to disrupt enemy units, which then for the Prussians means they've got to spend points rallying before they can attack. And again, with that finite resource, it's very expensive for them. So looking forward to playing it again. For me, a great little game. As I say, a game you can probably play realistically in a couple of hours once you've got your head around it. I think it'd be a really good game to play 2 players, which is what it's meant to be. But just as easy, you can play it solitaire as well. So for me, a thumbs up from White Dog. I really like the game. Other than the slight glitch on some of the counters and maybe the map quality, I'd love to see a canvas map of this, but I'm not sure that will ever happen now. Or maybe even a reprint of the game would be nice to see, because I think it's got a lot to offer and there's some very interesting mechanics in there. which I'd like to see carried into other games. And in fact, there's a few things in there I'm thinking about for a game I'm working on at the moment that may be quite useful from that point of view. So overall, thumbs up, Crisis on the Right, Plancenoit 1815, White Dog Games. Hope you've enjoyed this video and hope to bring you some more material very, very soon. Enjoy your gaming weekend.